denke, NEADS is a plan for cross disability across Canada. Charitable organization. We have three pillars with all the production in class or on campus experience and employment. And our programming is always aligned with these pillars. Through our programming, we offer event resources, reports, as well as financial assistance program. We collaborate and partner with a number of organizations throughout Canada, as well as governmental departments. And this webinar is a testimony to testament to one of our partnerships. We always strive to improve opportunities for disabled students, neurodiverse students, as well as graduates. Our virtual access for all projects is one of our main projects. In brief, it's a 2-year project, and we have received a 2-year expansion through our further implement and the Department of Canada. This project aims to empower and support students who are navigating ableism and other types of operations throughout their post-secondary journey. NEADS recognizes the ableism prevailing within post-secondary institutions, and this is why we strive to offer programming with mutual care and collaboration in mind. We all generate inclusive and accessible spaces opportune for discussions and research sharing. A few examples of our programming through this project are monthly webinars, outreach to staff, as well as quarterly reports. We also expanded our financial assistance this program, and finally this project as part of Accessibility Resilience program through the COVID-19 pandemic. My name is Chloe. My pronouns are DNT, and I'm a white grip queer settler. I currently reside on the traditional territory of the Attendees and Anishinaabe and Mississauga peoples, to the unceded territory of the Algonquin peoples will forever be my home, and where I first learned from indigenous communities. I am the lead researcher for NEADS, and it is my absolute pleasure to introduce today's webinar. The webinar will be moderated by Aria, who is the founder of the future disabled lawyers initiative. As I said earlier, NEADS has a lot of partnerships and collaborations opportunities, and this webinar stems from one of our newer partnerships. Aria will moderate a discussion between disabled lawyers and law students. Thank you, Aria and Adelia, for reaching out to me. This webinar is about partnerships between the Canadian Association of Lawyers with Disabilities, future disabled lawyers initiative, and NEADS. And now I will invite it to Aria. Thank you.
I think if it's okay, I can jump in here. This is Odelia talking with the Canadian Association of Lawyers with Disabilities. I wanted to introduce the organization a little bit and say a few words briefly, but I do want to keep it quite brief because tonight is actually about you, and that is the people who are in attendance tonight, the people who, like Aria, I'm getting emotional about this. We've been working on this for a long time. So Aria came to us before being accepted to law school, I think in the admission process, and said, there's this great idea that I have. I see a need for people to be able to talk with disabilities, to be able to talk about what it means to go to law school, because I have the sense a lot of people are making the decisions not to go because they don't see themselves there. And, you know, it was just kind of this informal thing. sent a note to me, and we had a phone call or a chat. And that's really what called the Canadian Association of Lawyers with Disabilities, the Association Canadienne de Juristes en Situation de Handicap, is really about. It's about bringing people together to pursue these ideas that we all have about how we can make the profession of law and access to justice as a whole more accessible. While the number of Canadians who identify as disabled has risen in the latest numbers to 27%, 30% of Canadian women actually in the adult population, our representation as disabled people within the practice of law hovers somewhere around 5.6% for lawyers and 7.8% for paralegals in Ontario. And that number of folks who identify drops even more dramatically to less than 1% in the province of Quebec. And so we know that something is going on. The idea for this project came to me after witnessing many of my disabled peers struggle themselves within the legal profession, first in school and then in moving to practice. The practice of law in its various forms is a very demanding profession, and it's also a profession that embeds and imbues privilege. So we've made, we have to make a commitment to equality and inclusion in order to promote well-being of those who work in the field and also the public that we serve. Now, I do talk about lawyers, and that's in the name of our organization, but it is important to note that we are cross-disability, we are grassroots, and we welcome people who have decided to pursue parallel careers or aren't able to practice within the field of law because we don't want to replicate the same discrimination that we face within the profession. So I will throw in a link in the chat for the Canadian Association of Lawyers with Disabilities. I encourage people to connect with each other. And if they want to connect with us, we are on various social media platforms as well. Please do so. But I don't want to take up any more of your time. Some of our members and board members will be speaking on the panel this evening, and I'd like to pass the floor on to Aria and those wonderful folks who make up the panel. Thank you so much for being here tonight, and to NEADS and Chloe in particular. It's been absolutely fantastic to see this come together. Thank you so much.
Thank you for that, Odelia. I'd like to begin by welcoming everyone to today's webinar. I think both Odelia and Chloe have touched on this, but this event was made possible due to the incredible folks at both of these organizations, and they have worked with me tirelessly over the past year to make this event happen. As someone who recently applied law school, I struggled a lot with seeing myself in the profession, as did many students that I've spoken to. And this is why events like this one tonight are so important. And I really appreciate each of you making the time to be here tonight. With that, I would like to begin with a land acknowledgement for the land that I am on currently. I would like to acknowledge I am present on the traditional territory of many Indigenous nations. The area known as Toronto has been caretaken by the Anishinaabe Nation, the Haudenosaunee Confederacy, and the Huron-Wendat. It is now home to many First Nation, Inuit, and Métis communities. I acknowledge the current treaty holders, the Mississaugas of the Credit First Nation, and that this territory is subject to the Dish with One Spoon Wampum Belt Covenant, an agreement to peaceably share and care for the Great Lakes region. Now, I know we have folks tuning in from across Canada today, so I'd like to invite everyone to learn about the land they are on using Native Land Canada. This is a fantastic Indigenous-led organization that maps Indigenous territories in Canada and across the world. So please take some time to explore the resource now or after the webinar. I'll now begin with introducing our panelists for the event. And I will begin with myself. My name is Aria Lorenz, as I'm sure you have all seen from our promotional materials, and I have the pleasure of serving as your moderator this evening. I am currently a 1L student at Osgoode Hall Law School here in Toronto, and the founder of the Future Disabled Lawyers Initiative, which I will speak to a bit more at the end of this webinar. We'll start off by asking our panelists about their experiences, and I will open the floor to questions after. Now, to introduce our panel, joining us from Yukon is Bruce Warrensby. Bruce, if you want to wave, that would be great. Bruce holds a JD from the University of Victoria, is the former president of the Yukon branch of the Canadian Bar Association, and currently is a sole practitioner. Bruce's practice focuses on Yukon First Nations treaty implementation and governance, primarily in justice working to reawaken Indigenous laws. Thank you, Bruce. Next, we have Isaac Sahota, who is a current JD student at UBC's Peter Allard School of Law. He is part of the UBC Innocence Project, Pro Bono Students Canada, and the Trial Lawyers Association of BC Equity, Diversity, and Inclusion Committee. Thank you, Isaac. Next, I'd like to introduce Andrew Green. Andrew holds a JD from the University of Alberta, and he currently works for the Edmonton Community Legal Centre and sits on the board of Voices of Albertans with Disabilities. Joining me as well from Toronto is Rebecca. Rebecca is a writer, researcher, and former registered nurse. She has recently graduated with a JD from Osgoode Hall Law School and undertook a research project during her time there, titled Understanding the State of Disability Justice in Ontario Law Schools. Rebecca's research explores the experiences of students with disabilities from a disability justice framework. We also have two panelists joining us from Ottawa. The first is Philip Turcotte. Philip holds a JD from the University of Ottawa's Faculty of Law. He has held positions as a policy analyst, a legal policy lawyer, and as legal counsel. He currently works as counsel with the Department of Justice Canada's Aboriginal Law Centre. Next is Rachel Lewis. Rachel is a current JD student at the University of Ottawa. She is the co-creator of the Canadian Neurodiversity in Law Project, the former National Director of Advocacy for the Black Law Students Association of Canada, and has interned with the Canadian Senate. And finally, I'd like to introduce Morgan Higginson. Morgan is a current JD student of New Brunswick Faculty of Law and is the current president of UNB's Law Students Chronic Illness and Disability Association. So thank you to all the fantastic panelists for taking the time to be here today. Now, I'd like to start off with a question for our current students. You have each been invited to take part both because of your experiences of disability and neurodivergency, but also because you've taken on leadership roles within the community. You have all done so in ways that are unabashedly intersectional, bringing your identities and experiences to the forefront. So tell us, what is law school like for you? I'll turn to Morgan first.
Thank you for that introduction. I'm Morgan, and I'm so happy to be here today. I would love to talk about my law school experience. Just would like for people to know ahead of time that it has not been wonderful. So there will be some personal stories, I guess, that may be a bit upsetting. But yeah, as a law student in New Brunswick, I have had an incredibly isolating experience. I feel very separated from my classmates and from my professors. And I've always been very open about, my learning disabilities and being autistic and my physical disabilities. And that's just always been who I am, being very open about such a big part of me. And that's not something that was done at the school before I got there. People, didn't share that kind of stuff, but I thought I need to be open about it. I am comfortable being open about it, and just because other people might be uncomfortable hearing about it doesn't mean that that someone shouldn't be talking about it, I guess. I have a lot of accommodations, and I am aware that they're extensive, but my case is very complex. Uh, and the law school, unfortunately, has never had to deal with someone who has has disabilities to the extent that I do. And so they don't have processes in place for a lot of the barriers that I experience. And as a result, it takes multiple months usually for any movement at all. And that definitely impacts my grades, not having accommodations in place. And um, I went to UNB for my undergrad, hoping that the transition to law school would be a lot smoother with accommodations because it was the same accessibility center. Boy, was I wrong. That was definitely not the case for me. And, that's one of the biggest reasons I'd say that I have worked so hard to advocate for change is that if even one person has to go through this after me, I'll feel like I'll have failed, right? Like there's no way that anyone should have to go through um, the level of difficulty and, constant criticism and questioning and um, always having to, prove, I guess, that you weren't just let in, right? Like I definitely have people make me feel like I was just a charity case, and that I didn't qualify like everybody else, and that my academic achievements aren't as worthy as theirs because I received accommodations to get mine. And people really have a hard time understanding that the accommodations are to put us on a level playing field. And yet, not having those accommodations really puts me at such a disadvantage compared to everybody else. Um, and a lot of people are fine with that, because it's hard to change things, right? And it's hard for people's minds to change, especially professors who have been, at the universities for so long, and then see a student coming in that has all these needs that they've never had to deal with before. It's been incredibly difficult. And I mean, I'm glad that I did it because I wanted to be a lawyer since I was 10. Like, I've only ever seen myself as a lawyer. But it wasn't until I got to law school that that picture started becoming blurry. I had a really hard time visualizing what my life would be like after law school. Especially because, New Brunswick is a smaller community and there were no, I guess, mentors or people that I could, reach out to at all. And the people who are in Ontario have been amazing. I've reached out to a lot of the law schools there and connected. But compared to my peers, my actual classmates, I'd say I don't really have many friends. I'm still not receiving my accommodations 3 years in. My grades are incredibly low, too low to transfer to another university. And yeah, I'm trying. I wake up every single day and I'm still trying. But that's all I can hope for, I guess, is just to keep going.
Thank you for sharing that, Morgan. I think it's important for students to have a realistic perspective sometimes about the challenges that people experience. Next, I'd like to pass it over to Isaac.
Thank you, Aria. Yeah, for me, I would say I'm a person with disability. I'm a disabled student and I use wheelchair. So for sure, my experience will be overlapping with that. But I will try to talk about few things that I think are the highlights. One would be, coming to law school been really rewarding in a way that um, I can see different ways that and different tools that could be used to empower marginalized communities. And for sure, me including, because I'm one part of a marginalized community. So, that gave me faith in future that, there are ways we can utilize to make our lives better. For sure, law school is intense. I always imagined law school as intense, and I think I was right. Also wrong because I didn't know it was gonna be that intense. So as Morgan was saying, it's really important to be able to communicate your needs to the institute. By institute, I mean law school, and being able to get all the accommodations you need, because that's the only way to really experience law school and get something positive out of it. Because otherwise, law in itself is a pretty intense subject. So I think when someone is disabled, they have more things to take care of than just academia. So yeah, I would say, that's one part. Like before that, it was hard. But the more I understood how I can, communicate my needs and all the accommodations that were available to me, it did help. And at the end, I would say it is a place where change is needed, law school. And I think it's gonna be us through our experience that we will be able to bring that. But yeah, there is hope, but it is intense.
Thank you, Isaac. I think hope is definitely something that I want everyone to take away from today's webinar. Even though we're hearing some tough experiences from folks, I hope that it also provides everyone a sense of hope. I'm going to turn next to Rachel.
Hi, everyone. I would like to just first say I want to thank Chloe, especially for the words she was using in regards to testimony. I think this is very much a space that is not only allowing us to feel comfortable to speak our voices on the issues that we're having in law school and across Canada. I want to thank NEADS. I want to thank the panel, the moderators today for allowing to make this space. I think it's very much needed. Morgan and Isaac, in regards to your guys' testimonies as well, it's very much helpful. I would say the same in regards to maybe the struggles I've had in law school. It was a difficult process coming in first year and not seeing the accommodations that were easily accessible that I had when I was in undergrad. I'm sure everyone can attest they are very much eager and freely to give it in some capacity, and it's very much helpful. But then once I started property law and I needed to be having text to hear and having it played back to me. It was a whole process in order to email certain people to find out how to get the information so that I can be able to just read my textbooks coherently and have a better understanding, because I have an understanding of being able to read it, but also listening to it and playing it back and being able to listen is very helpful. So I think there is struggles with that. I do see that there's often a turf war when regards to accessibility centers and law schools. That's been a huge issue that I've witnessed. I have spoken to many students across Canada, and a lot of them have voiced the same complaints. I know that definitely I agree. There is hope in the instance of being able to understand what is needed. I know me being a Black woman is not always, the first thing I want to say is that I have diverse thought abilities or that I'm different to some capacity, because that's not always welcomed in certain spaces. There's already stigmatization to a lot of ways when it comes to Black people, when it comes to racialized peoples, when it comes to Indigenous peoples. And so, yeah, there's a lot of work that needs to be done in regards to law schools. And my struggle has never been one that I've always been very happy about, but I champion it in a way because I also want to know that if we can close an inequitable gap that is already happening and allowing students who are coming after us, who have diverse abilities, to be able to see that you can become a lawyer, and that you can also get the resources you need to succeed, then that will be greatly appreciated. And so I think, yeah, that's kind of my experiences. It was very much a struggle. Sometimes I relate to you, Morgan. I do feel sometimes lonely. I feel sometimes as if people don't understand. I feel sometimes separated in a lot of capacity, and you wonder and you question, why is, given this circumstance, why am I struggling with this? But then also I would encourage you even too, and I would encourage others who maybe feel the same way, know that it's not necessarily a superpower to be who you are, but it's also just like a joyful thing to know that you are different than other people. You don't always have to be the same. And I think that's the great part of it sometimes too. And you can find solutions to the same question that a professor or a law professor gives you, and still be able to answer it just in your own way and your own understanding. And that is just more than enough than others. So yeah, I would say that. And my solutions, lastly, I would say, because I've always been pushing for strategic basis when it comes to certain things. We need more mentorship. I know the Ontario Bar Association has pushed for that, and they have been doing some networking and stuff as well, but we need more across law schools for law students so that they can have not only the comfortability of being able to have confidentiality with their peers, but also in regards to being able to stand up for each other when a law professor doesn't want to accept a certain accommodation or doesn't feel comfortable, with something as simple as recording, because of whatever reasons they feel uncomfortable about. I do also think that there needs to be teaching for law professors as well. Not having PowerPoints that are always 100. Like, we know that law is very condensed in a lot of ways of like synthesizing understanding and work, and the law and how we can apply it. I mean, I just came out of a law of evidence class and I'm a little bit jaded on terror of fact and all that stuff and reasoning, but it's good to find different ways of being able to teach that, because then not only are you producing lawyers that have a sense or basis of understanding for how to move into those fields that they want to, but you're allowing us also to be able to know that we don't have to have one understanding of a teaching style. There are many facets that can help us and support our needs. So that's what I would have to say to that. And thank you again.
Thank you, Rachel. I really appreciate also everyone being so vulnerable I think, it's important to have this conversation in spaces that were designed for disabled people and by disabled people. And so I really appreciate everyone being so honest, even when the experiences aren't always positive. And thank you, Rachel and Isaac, for highlighting some things that we need to do better. I'd also like to loop in our recent grad, Rebecca. I understand that while at Osgood, you researched this exact kind of question. So, based on your own experiences and your conversations with other disabled students, what do you think about what has been said?
Yeah, I think a lot of it, I feel like I was nodding my head the whole time because I think a lot of it resonates, and it is nice to be in a space where with people who get it. So as sort of a self-accommodation in my third year, so this past year, I did an intensive research project, which was a way to do a lot of credits and get the accommodations I needed. And I did it with my supervisor, Professor Amar Bhatia, who might be on the call. So what it was a survey of students and staff across Ontario law schools, looking at the experiences of students and the perspectives of staff. And also I had some focus groups with some academics and experts and leaders in the disability space. So I'm still in the process of writing up the paper, but if I can kind of summarize what I found, and this resonates with my own experience too, is that, of course, there's a range of experiences. Disability isn't homogenous. Obviously, two people with the same disability can have different experiences, and people with different disabilities can have different experiences. And also other factors, folks with intersecting identities, race and ethnicity can be factors that affect how your experience in law school is, of course. And also things like what law school you go to. But overall, what I found is that while some people reported positive experiences or even neutral, the overwhelming theme was that participants experienced some form or forms of ableism in law school. Probably not surprising, as per existing as a disabled person in the world, it's kind of hard to escape. Some of the things that included in law school was that disabled students didn't feel is too passive of a term, but disabled students' personhood and value isn't always recognized. They're seen as less than, less capable, less valuable. There are patterns of prejudice and discrimination against students with disabilities in general, but also specifically students with invisible disabilities. I think there's that idea of having to prove something over and over again and not being believed that came up. There's also lack of support from peers, which Morgan, I think, talked about a lot, was sometimes people are going to hide their disability because they don't want to face, the ableism from their peers. And one of the other things is just the level of self-advocacy required. So knowing you're going in and you're going to have to fight for what you need. And again, it's not a want, it's what you need to be able to do law school. And so while there's a lot of policies in place, and there's a lot of, Rachel, I think you said this about between accessibility service and the law school, there's a lot of tension there. But there are policies in place, but in reality, in substance, there's a real lack of equality in reality. And so what my experience and the commitment of post-secondary education, which is a colonial ableist institution at its core, is that, again, it's talking a lot about diversity and inclusion, but in reality, it's not practicing that. There's a really great book by Jay Dolmage called Academic Ableism, if anybody's interested. But this isn't surprising per se. In Canada, a state that is an ongoing colonial project. And also disabled people aren't generally welcome in liberal societies. I think of the quote from Diane Potier and Richard Devlin, and they talk about how liberalism would not seek to abolish race or gender or sexual orientation, but it would seek to abolish disability, because we're not supposed to, quote, suffer disability. And that is kind of the overall sense in law school too. It's okay, we'll do these few things, but the reality is it'd be better if you change, better if you fit into this box. And it's not isolated to law school, of course. I mean, again, existing as a disabled person in the world, it's kind of what happens. And this it's also broader than that. We see it in what's happening across the world and across genocides. It's what we see in Palestine, where people are being genocided by Israel, another colonial project. We see people being disabled intentionally and disabled people being targeted. We saw it in Haiti in 2010 when cholera killed thousands of people. That was a direct result of UN intervention, US, Canadian, and French imperialism. We see it in the abuse of Congolese people's bodies who are forced to work in cobalt mines in DRC to make the technology we're using today. T.L. Lewis, who's a writer, activist, says that disability is created through violence. And that can be as big as genocide, or it could be through other things like legislated poverty, trauma, deprivation of language, of housing, of employment, of food, all of that. And so violence in all of its forms tends to disable and target disabled people. And so why am I talking about this when we're talking about our disabled people welcome in law school? And it's really because, as a lot of advocates say, like, everything is connected. And I think it's helpful not to be surprised by this. And I'm sure many people won't or wouldn't be surprised because, again, we all exist in various of these systems. The system wasn't made for us, but that doesn't mean we shouldn't be here. I think of that for myself too. My experiences were difficult in law school, which is partly why I did this research, because I felt this way and I said, well, my experience is just one person. I'm disabled and queer, but I'm a white settler. And so that's one experience. And I have an invisible disability. And so I knew I wanted space and this is also that space to talk about it, to hear about it, to feel like you're not alone in it. And so I don't think law school can't be a space for disabled people. I think it's just knowing what you're going into, knowing what is going to be asked of you, knowing what kind of how you can navigate it. People say knowledge is power, and I think that's incredibly true. Law school taught me a lot. It taught me to be a better writer, a better researcher, a better advocate. And so, yeah, that's kind of my experience plus my research all combined into condensed version.
Just a follow-up question for you, Rebecca. I know that you chose not to go into legal practice. Can you tell us a little bit about that?
Yeah, I went into law school, I don't know, 50-50, but I hadn't decided if I was going to practice or not. I knew I wanted to do some type of community work, which could have been community lawyering or something. I just went in to say, like, let me learn the law to use it against itself. And that was kind of my motto. And as I was in it, I think I just realized, being a nurse and working in that system, I just decided that for me, the next step was not to work within the system to create change. And I think there's different aspects and roles for everybody. But for me, part of why I left nursing was and how that interacted with my disability and created my disability in reality. And so for me, it was to say, okay, what's the goal I went into law school with? Do I need to practice to do that? I don't. Let me save some money. Let me save some stress and continue to do the work that I wanted to do. And I will say, when I decided that, and part of it maybe was because I knew going in that I might not might not practice. But I never felt like regret or I shouldn't have done law school because the skills I learned are incredibly useful, incredibly helpful. And were the skills that I wanted to do the work I want to do. And so for me, that just doesn't look like practicing. Yeah.
Yeah, thank you for sharing that because I think definitely people, their presumption of law school is always you come out and you go straight into practice. So thank you for sharing that perspective as well as situating us within a larger global context of what's going on right now. I'd like to move to our practitioners next. So for our graduates and practitioner, looking back on your law school experience, how do you reflect on the challenges you faced in law school, and more specifically in the legal profession? So I'll begin with you, Philip.
Wonderful. Can I just confirm that you can hear me okay? It's a new headset, so I'm still figuring it out. I'll start maybe with just doing my own land acknowledgements. I just wanted to recognize that I'm joining you virtually today from Ottawa, the traditional and unceded territory of the Algonquin and Anishinaabe peoples. And I think it's important for me to recognize that both just as a human being, but also as a lawyer, and particularly to recognize that Indigenous legal traditions are the original traditions of this land that we all call home. And I think part of the reason why I practice in Aboriginal law is to try to better understand where we have been, how we got here, where we're going, and to try to contribute to a more honorable and more just relationship between myself as a non-Indigenous person and my Indigenous neighbors, our profession and our Indigenous neighbors, and as well as Indigenous legal systems and Canadian legal systems. Also, can I just give a brief visual description of myself? So I'm a white man in his early 30s. I have brown hair that today is tied up, brown eyes. I wear some glasses, and I'm wearing a floral patterned shirt. So as you mentioned, Aria, in your kind of introduction, I'm a queer disabled lawyer, and proudly so. I don't always kind of go into the whole spectrum of identities that I live with, in part because, as some folks have commented, not every space is safe to do so. But I thought it'd be important to do that tonight. So I'm someone with lived experience of physical disability. So I live with cerebral palsy, as well as some chronic pain as well. I'm neurodiverse, having learning disabilities and ADHD, and I also live with an anxiety disorder. And all of those kind of contribute to my experiences and I think to the unique perspectives that I'm able to bring to the work that I do and the spaces that I occupy. But they also contribute to barriers and to experiences that aren't as fun or as I would want them to be. But I'm very happy to be here with all of you tonight, and I'm already I think, Odelia, you were saying kind of it was emotional, but it was emotional for me too to hear from law students, because I'm so happy that you are where you are and that you're part of this adventure, and that you're contributing in the ways that you can in the spaces that are available to you. And I'll just maybe start by saying you absolutely deserve to be where you are. And you have a place there. And folks like me, I think, are trying to do what we can to make your journey to the practice of law, if you choose to practice law and you don't have to, um, a bit less maybe onerous than we've experienced. Like you mentioned, I'm a lawyer practicing in Ontario. I was called to the Bar of Ontario in 2017 and currently practicing with the Department of Justice Canada in Aboriginal law. And as some of you may do once you become lawyers, a bit of a disclaimer that just, what I share with you tonight are, of course, my own experiences and my own lived experiences. They're not legal advice, and they don't represent anyone else's positions other than my own. All right, so with that intro done, maybe I'll turn to a bit of law school. I think kind of what I've heard tonight mirrors a lot of, unfortunately, I think mirrors some of the experiences that I had. And I say unfortunately, because even though I graduated in 2016, I had hoped that maybe folks would be having some easier times by now. I went to law school at U Ottawa, and one of the things that I kind of noticed really quickly was how different existing as a disabled student is in law school. Because in my undergrad, I did my undergrad at Carleton University in legal studies. My own personal views that Carleton should have a law school, but I won't get into that tonight. Excuse me. Undergrad went reasonably well. I was very happy with my grades and my experiences. I had some accommodation challenges, but largely it was more of a learning journey and just kind of getting to know myself and having access to people that I could talk to talk about kind of what was working well, what wasn't working well, and different tools that I could use to allow me to kind of have the experience that I wanted and put the effort that I wanted into my studies. Um, and I had expected maybe to have the same experience in law school and did not. And one of the ways that was made very evident to me, and I don't know if there's anybody from U Ottawa here tonight, but anyways, this is criticism that they're most likely already aware of. In undergrad, I would get my accommodation letter from the disability services provider and have a chat with each of my professors individually to talk about, how we could make our collective experience accessible to me. In law school, that did not happen. So what would happen was that I would have to go to a specialized equity advisor who would anonymize me and be the communicator between myself and my professors to facilitate my accommodation needs. And I found that a little, in a way, it was nice because I had a central point person who kind of knew me and who I could just say, hey, this is what I'm going through, this is what I need. And they would have that institutional validity of saying, yep, I confirm that that's what Phil needs and he's just going to get it. In another way, it prevented me from forming that bond with my professors that I had come to greatly rely on in undergrad, in which kind of the experience of disability and talking about disability kind of gave me maybe an experience with my professors that some of my non-disabled colleagues did not have. But it became evident to me that the reason that system was different at U Ottawa in law school, and this was not just me figuring it out, like it was explicitly told to me, was to prevent discrimination. Because the faculty had known from past experiences that faculty members would indirectly or directly discriminate against students with disabilities. That was known, and that was the solution that was found, was to create an intermediary between the student and the faculty. And so that took a lot of effort. Like it wasn't, you you get to law school, you go through that gauntlet, you make it in, and then automatically the message you get is you may, just because of who you are, have a really different and difficult experience here. And don't worry, we've created a system to protect you from that. And then just, I think, to echo what some of other folks have said, just the additional challenges of getting the tools that you need in a compressed time frame of law school. Like I needed electronic versions of my textbooks. Well, if that took 3 weeks to get, and within my first day of class, I had an assignment that was due in a week, can't do the assignment. I don't have the book. And so, and law school is not built for those kind of delays. So processes around that. There was a strategy that was really helpful for me in undergrad that I wasn't able to use in law school, which was to take a reduced course load and then take some courses in the summer. There was no summer courses. Well, there were some summer courses at U Ottawa, but there was no option to take a reduced course load. It was just either be a full-time student or be a part-time student. And part-time was not something that I felt I needed for myself, so it wasn't something I was willing to explore. Not to mention that people essentially told me that they'd be, kind of ending my career before starting it if I was to take part-time law school. I don't agree with that, but that's the perception that some people have. So all that to say that, I don't really feel like as much as I don't regret going to law school, and clearly it's given me a career that I find very rewarding, and very fortunate to find rewarding already at this stage in just about 6 years of practice. I didn't get to enjoy it because of the barriers that I faced and the additional work that I had to put in just to be in the space. And so I think there's a lot we can improve, and I'm happy to chat about that a bit later as well. And then in practice, I would say the challenges are still there. They're different. One of the biggest things for me, excuse me, was to translate the accommodation measures and the barrier removal measures that I knew I needed into a 9 to 5 world of work. That's not, oh, you have ADHD, you need to take a break because your brain's overwhelmed. Take a break for 3 hours and come back to your paper. Can't do that in a 9 to 5 environment. So just having the space to kind of explore that and find the tools that worked for me. And I'm still a work in progress, but it's definitely happening. But I would think that that's an important transition and one that I'm hoping that future lawyers with disabilities are better supported in, because it's not always obvious, and it requires a lot of self-advocacy and self-awareness. But I would just say kind of like, don't be afraid to try new things. If you find that something that you've been doing is not working for you, have that discussion. If you're not ready to have it with, your immediate manager, find a colleague, find a friend, someone to brainstorm with first. Email me maybe, and we can chat it out. Yeah, so I think maybe for now I would just kind of say, there are still barriers. A lot of them are mostly cultural and attitudinal. I think we have to realize that the legal profession is one in which some very toxic and ableist notions of productivity exist, and they're very unique in the legal profession. Other professions have similar things, but this idea of the billable hour model, we can talk about that forever, so maybe I'll leave that for um, another part of our discussion. But yeah, there's definitely some attitudinal barriers towards how you practice law, how you do your work. And unfortunately, our non-disabled colleagues are often only exposed to one way of doing things, which is the way that was built for people without disabilities. And that's the only perspective they know, and then they just repeat that. And so it's important to know that doing things differently is valuable, and that it brings a diversity that is, I think, essential, not only to just humanity, but to the legal profession. And so, yeah, I think I would maybe end it on that, and just to say there are definitely ways to practice law with a disability. I'm living proof of that. And yeah.
Thank you, Philip, for also giving the perspective of your law school self versus now as a practitioner. I'd like to just invite folks. In a few minutes, we'll start the Q&A. So if you'd like to pose any questions to any of our panelists, feel free to drop them in the chat, and we will start the Q&A in a few minutes. But before that, I would like to turn to Bruce. I understand that you created a scholarship based on your experiences in law school. So I was hoping you could tell us a bit more about that and about your practice.
Yeah, sure. There's a lot I can obviously talk about. So I went to law school. I graduated 2014. I mean, I had a little bit more of a positive experience, but I think part of that was you know my best friend has a somewhat similar my best friend in law school has a somewhat similar diagnosis profile to me. So heck, we go and have fun and be able to just complain about the system and whatever. So that's a lot of fun. We had a great group my first 2 years. I kind of fell off the third year because people left. And I mean I think here and I'll try and slow down a bit because I do talk too much. And so to the surprise of no one, yes, I do. Yes, I was diagnosed at one point as a kid as ADHD. The Ritalin didn't work, so that ended up being untreated. So I'm going to look. I also have type 1 neurofibromatosis, a severe nonverbal learning disability, which is not really a formal diagnosis so much anymore. oppositional defiance disorder, which is a fun one, and um, dysgraphia and dyslexia. So yay the laundry list, and I'm also one that I'm that as I have to have a reassessment to get some more treatment into ADHD as I'm looking at, and actually what triggered it was watching some videos on autism and saying that does sound a bit adult diagnosis. That does sound a bit like me, and a lot of people in my life have said you're autistic, right? And I'm just like, no, not as far as know, and I'm just like realizing that maybe that's no, not as far as I know at this point. So yeah, that's my background. I'm also a Tronic Witch-Sisseton, which is a First Nation out of Dawson. We were the ones that were impacted by the Klondike Gold Rush. Klondike is in fact the origin of the English word Klondike. So that's a lot of fun. That's always been where I focus a lot on my personal statement. And two things that I do are cool. I'm on the national board of directors for the Canadian. I'm speaking way too fast again, aren't I? For the Canadian Bar Association, and I am the secretary of the Yukon Law Society. In that role, we do deal with credentials of people seeking to become lawyers and seeking to transfer to Yukon as lawyers. And you know, so I didn't. I think I had a fairly positive experience in law school, but since coming out of there, I just I currently am fortunate enough to be in a position where I can have a sole practice kind of on a part-time basis. I find full-time work somewhat overwhelming, and just the structure with my particular profile, it's difficult to fit into, government structures. But then government is the only place that gives accommodation, and just I find doing things my own way is what works. And I'm fortunate to find that I have legal counsel who I've known since I'm a kid, who is really awesome to work with, and getting to work with my First Nation, which is super super fantastic. But I'll admit it, Articlin, I had my principal take me into her office, essentially question why the hell did UVic give you a law degree, when you're writing this crap. And yeah, that's a fun thing to say. It's just because that's a difference between what you'll get as accommodations in law school versus what you get as accommodations in the work world. And I mean, that ultimately did trigger having to essentially have a hearing with the Law Society executive um on fitness to practice, as my first experience with being in the profession. So that was a challenge, but I ultimately was successful and got through that. And but I'll certainly say this, dealing with credentials for the Law Society, if it happens to anyone, it might, because we stand there to an extent to protect the public, but we're not trying to stop anyone. We're not trying to be hurtful of anyone who has a disability. A lot of what we want to understand it, if it comes to that, and I'm not saying it's going to come to that with anyone, but if it comes to that, we want you to be able to really help us understand how you are going to do the things that you need to do to make sure your clients are protected, to make sure that you're successful in a legal practice. So for me, it's having someone review my work before I send anything substantive out, because words matter in the legal profession, and I tend to have wordles. I have non-phonetic reading, which means I know words because I know words. I don't know words because I can sound out each phonetic word and make those words mean other words. So that's a really obvious. I have to be able to articulate how I'm going to deal with that. I sometimes have the computer read back to me in Word what I've written, and so that's that's really wonderful. I mean, and you know, I've just had it just really hard to have people come in and question your ability, but sometimes I think particularly when you're looking at the law society doing this, it sounds horrible to say fitness to practice, but really what we're doing is we're really, at least from when I do it, you know, and you know, it might be different from others, but when I do it, I'm really looking at, does this person understand what they need to know to be able to be the best lawyer they can be for those clients. And that's what I want. That's what I think any law society will want, is to hear that you know how to behave, and how to not necessarily, but you know how to accommodate yourself in this profession, particularly where it can be a lot less structured than a law school. A law school where there's one person you go to explain what you need, or you can have someone proofread something, because it's not a confidential client docu it's not a confidential client document. So that's good. I mean, I also tend to do areas of law that are more talking areas of law, like, you know, I voluntarily said I am not touching real estate, because real estate is reading and writing, and that's not where I excel. So my first law career was criminal defense. I went to a negotiated position for a year at UN government. That didn't work out. You know, a lot of having very strict structure about how written communications produced and all that, not effective. I mean, I also tend to blather on about in unnecessary things, because, well, that's the way, you know, the best way I have heard ADHD explained is, it's like there's five TV channels going on in my brain at once. So, you know, I tend to get into one of the other channels that might be irrelevant to it, and I have to I have to refocus on what is relevant. And so, you know, just, I think a lot of it in the profession, and where I really encourage a lot of things, I think we get a lot of that from some of our panelists, is to really understand, is to really focus on getting that understanding of what your disability is. Now, you know, I think a lot of that, the schools are a lot better nowadays, and in the past in the past decade, since I graduated in 2002, where, you know, it was just, you're a problem, you know, we're not going to really go in detail that, and you know, I really found that grade school thing, I think, wasn't really done well with me, and that, I think, that led to a lot of my issues. But, you know, it just I think it's really getting that understanding of knowing who you are, because you're great, you're all great, and what you need to, be to be the best function you can be, and being able to articulate that to anyone who will question or make comments about why, or how, or how you function. Like, I mean, people just know that I'm the guy who'll get coffee five times in a meeting, because stimulants are good for me, and and I just am, I'm just the one who will, when I'm not injured, like I am right now with a sprained ankle, I'm up and about, but I'm still paying attention. I'm still following along with everything that's being said. So yeah, so I think that's really important, is really what I'll pass on to anyone who's going through it, is really have some good self-reflection about really knowing what your needs are, and how you can do those in any workplace, and don't be scared to smash a path through in a completely different and new way. So yeah, I think that's great. I mean, so I'll talk a bit about the scholarship at UVic that I established in the memory of my mom, Loretta Warnsby, which is basically, we've established a scholarship in my mom's memory that is aimed at Indigenous students, but we might expand it on applicants because we want the money, but the Indigenous students with learning disabilities, and so it provides funding to seek out accommodation materials and equipment that may not be present that may not be available to students who have those needs. Now, I know there's a lot of great tax credits and other things that are awesome, that are absolutely awesome and should be asked and should and to access and yeah, but to make sure people have laptops, iPads, whatever students need, and I think that was really good. I think it was also really good for me when I was at that we were able to afford those accommodations. We were able to my mom was able to, and I mean this is probably embarrassing, going to law school in your late 20s and yeah, having your mom proofread stuff for you. Yeah, maybe that's not the best thing to have done, but like, I mean, I can't write well to save my life, and it was a challenge going to UVic where they'd absolutely say, that you're not allowed to have a scribe for 100% exams. So my first year exam marks are pretty my marks are a really weird split of high marks in any paper course and any course where I could do things with papers, and low marks in anything where I took an exam, because exams are not fun. But the good thing was I found out the bar exam was mostly multiple choice and fill in the blanks. So yeah. So that was good, but yeah, just, and always I think if anyone's listening is not an graduate and thinks maybe these accommodations don't matter. I think it's important to really start building that case as you get towards law school, where you might hit that wall and not be successful because you've not had accommodations throughout. So yeah, I mean, and I do think it's good to be open, because one thing I tend to do, and this is obviously another classic thing that they should have thought more about ADD a long time ago, but ADHD a long time ago, but is, I'll tend not to eat. I was doing clinical, and my friend would get on talking about something, and my friend would be, yeah, Bruce, have you had anything to eat other than grabbing maybe a donut for breakfast and several cups of coffee? I'm just like, no, get something to eat now. You're shut down from any work until you've eaten. And so yeah, I did that, and that was a lot of success, and just I think remembering a lot of self-care, a lot of really getting that thing, and as I often end things is I quote Homer Simpson: if I could just say a few words, I'd be a much better public speaker. But I'm a terrible public speaker because I can never say just a few words. So I think there's a lot of people waiting and being eager beavers with questions to all our wonderful panelists. So I'll shut my mouth now and let others have a say.
Thank you, Bruce. And thank you for sharing also that tough experience that you had during articling. I think something that I've been hearing from a lot of folks is that it's important to not get discouraged. I've been hearing a lot of experiences of negativity or people putting disabled folk down. So I think that we're all here and that we have viewers here is also a testament to resilience from each of us. Finally, just the last question before our Q&A, I'd like to turn it to Andrew. And I'd like to ask a bit about how practicing law is like for you and what law school was like as a mature student.
Okay. You spotted immediately that I'm a mature student. I'm a fairly new call. I'm coming up on 2 years, and I'm not a younger student. I was a mature student in my, late 40s when I went to law school. And I will say that most of the things that people here have said already echo with me. one of the things was books. That was a real
Right.
struggle. But there were also many other struggles. And I don't want to repeat what other people have said again. I just want to reaffirm that those things are real. But I also want to tell you a little bit about my experience in law school in a different way. What I do sometimes is I talk about being a storyteller because that's really what my work is about right now. But my first story for you is to talk about what happened my first week of law school. And many of you who've been to law school remember the first week is exciting. And there's lots of hope and promise and expectations. And it's a little bit scary too. And I heard someone say, I just want to let everyone know. If you joined law school to make money, you're going to make some money. You may not be in the richest profession, but you can make some money. If you joined law school for prestige, then there's prestige for many lawyers. But if you came to law school because you wanted to change the world, you're in the wrong place. So a few minutes later, I was asked why I wanted to go to law school, and I said, I want to change the world. And that's what I think, and I hope disabled people will do in law school and as lawyers. We can change this world. The legal profession is one of privilege. Somebody mentioned Jay Domage's book earlier, and there's a lot of imagery in there that is really important to me, but I would say the legal profession has been closed to so many equity-seeking groups. But by being in those spaces, we can begin to change it. So fast forward into my first 6 months of law school. I learned about a case, Eldridge in BC. I won't go over that case for everybody today, but I know that anybody who's gone to law school probably knows Eldridge in BC. It is a case that has a few different takeaways, but the one that caught me was the issue of equity. And there was a line in this case, and when I read it, I thought, okay. And again, I'm going to paraphrase and probably do it badly. But it was that basically equal treatment is an impoverished vision of Section 15 of the Charter, equality rights. And when I heard that, I shared that with some friends who are disabled because I was kind of proud of myself. And, even though I'm older, I'm a first-year law student and I understand this case and I can explain it. So I felt pretty good about it. And then somebody said to me, so when's that going to happen? And it really hit me. We're not there yet. We're not there yet in so many ways. So moving along, my first year, I struggled with finding a space for myself. I, for a bunch of accessibility reasons, couldn't do the volunteer work that many of my peers were doing. But I reached out to a local organization, the one I work for now, and said, is there a space here for me? And the person I spoke to said, sure, what do you want to do? I had to think about it for a minute. I was like, do I even want to say this? Okay. I want to work with disabled people. And she said, okay, you want to work with people with disabilities? And I said, sure, we'll call them that too. I'll call them disabled people. You'll call them people with disabilities. It all works. And so that's what I started my volunteer work doing. And I'm still doing that today. But things that I've learned along the way. The way people tell you a lawyer should be, don't let that lock you in. I've heard people say, you've got to be a warrior. You've got to be strong. You've got to be able to do 70 hours a week. If you have a disability that causes you to work more slowly or have less energy, whatever it might be, then maybe this is not the profession for you. I'm going to say it is. Absolutely the profession for you. Because one of the problems with our profession is the idea of lawyer as warrior. Lawyer as this sole person who gets up and fights for the client. It's not that you just belong in law school. We need disabled people in law school because we bring something else to the profession. We can talk about things like interdependence, about our experience of vulnerability. And I'm not just saying that disabled people belong in the legal profession, but all equity-seeking groups do. Because if they're not there, we're not ever going to have the change that we need. And that's kind of where I'm at, is at this point, I've got a really great job in some ways. I work from home. I work probably 75% of my time with disabled people. All of my hearings and appearances are done by video conference or telephone. And it's given me a great deal of fulfillment. Getting to the space I'm at now was not easy. The one thing that I learned and probably didn't do enough of, and usually the way I learn is by the mistakes I make. Find mentors. Use disability supports if they exist. Push for more if you can. Make sure you've got a personal support network. And if you don't have one, build it. Reach out. I'll give you an example. Something Odelia mentioned at the very, very first of this presentation. Canadian Association of Lawyers with Disabilities. I wanted to say disabled lawyers, but anyway, I go back and forth between those two possibilities. But anyway, that's a great starting point. Share your experiences with others. When you're bottling them up, it's isolating. And that's just going to add to the difficulties in law school. Am I going to say that I did that perfectly? Nope. At times, I isolated myself by not finding the supports. I'm not going to suggest to you you're always going to find those supports in law school. I wish they were there. I wish we could change that right now. I wish that every disabled student could have those, but reach out. You've heard people talk here tonight. You'll hear others talk. It's important to have that network. Without it, you're going to have an isolating experience. And I will also say, by design, law school seems to want to put pressure on us. You're going to need to talk to people. Will you experience ableism? Yep. I think every speaker has talked about that in one way or another. I could probably tell you some more stories, but I'll just say that I found echoes in absolutely everyone's experience. I'm going to steal, though, from another community that I belong to. And I'm going to say that for me, it did get better. It got better in the end, not because I powered through it and I persevered and I made it. No. It is because I learned more about interdependence. I'm a really independent person. And as people with disabilities, we sometimes learn that interdependence is where our strength is. So today I can say I work from home. I do a job that some consider fairly stressful. I deal with a lot of disabled people in really deep poverty who are struggling with government systems and human rights issues. And we try and help people. I'll leave you with one last thought. And it's something that I bring to my work. People are always a little bit surprised by it. I rarely use the word client. I'm not saying that there's no division, but I talk about the people that I serve. And it's because in my work, and a lot of disabled people, either through accessibility centers at universities or elsewhere, have been clients way too often. And so I kind of avoid that word. I'm not saying that everyone should. I'm just saying I choose to. I've been a client way too often. A client, a patient, all of those words. And I want to kind of make myself something different. So I'm not trying to give you a cheery or bright view of what law school would be like. Lots of ableism, lots of barriers. You develop those supports, and you can find a path. And one other thing that somebody else sort of suggested is, if you don't find a path, that's okay too. Because law school is not the only way to change the world. The way you change the world is by living in it and being true to yourself. Anyway, that's all I'm going to say for now.
Thank you, Andrew. And thank you for really highlighting the importance of hope. I think that's definitely really rounded out our panel very well. So thank you. And so that concludes our formal portion of the panel. And so now I'm going to be asking some questions for our panelists. So the first one we've had from the chat, and I will seek any volunteer from the panel to answer. Someone wants to know how to explain bad grades in law school. So this could either be for law school applications or for job applications. Go ahead, Philip.
Yeah, I think this resonates with me both in the law school application context, and also in trying to obtain articling positions. In the law school application context, not necessarily my grades. My grades were really good, and that was in part a reflection of having been in an undergrad environment that I molded to suit me, and that was there to support me. But was with the LSAT, the law school admission test, because anyways, I won't go into that story too much for the interest of time, but I did not get all of the accommodations that I requested when I wrote the LSAT, and that significantly impacted my score. I would later be part of well, I didn't do any of the work. I just joined as a class action member, but there was a class action lawsuit in the United States for the discriminatory way in which the LSAT was administrated, and got a nice little check from that, which to this day I wish I would have framed, but it was one of actually my first experiences of the legal system working to remove disability barriers. But I say that because that I knew was going to be a big barrier for me in a system that focuses on grades and LSAT scores. And fortunately, I looked for that in law school applications. I looked for law schools where they gave applicants more space to explain, various reasons as to kind of how they got to apply to law school. And I only applied to law schools in Ontario, but going through the law school application OLSAS system, like I could tell. Yeah, some universities were like, "Are you diverse?" Yes, no, and that was all they wanted to know. Other schools like Osgoode and U Ottawa, two schools that I was fortunate to receive offers from, had specific streams for equity students, and I can't remember who said it. But I also, being part of that stream, also kind of got sometimes that are like, "Oh, you only made it in because you applied to the equity stream." But that may be true, but that was because those are the streams that allowed me to be my full self and to explain who I was as a candidate. So what I would say from that, and that kind of mirrors some articling positions where I had some bad grades in courses that I faced barriers in, or I just didn't connect with a professor's learning style, and didn't do great in that class. Um, in spaces where I didn't explain that, and it does take some vulnerability to do that, I didn't get either an offer or I didn't get a position. In spaces where I have been able to explain my path, I have gotten opportunities. And so what I would say is don't let that hold you back. Let that be part of your narrative and look for opportunities and for spaces that will welcome and give you an opportunity to explain, the things that you may wish away or that didn't have the chance to perform as well as you may have wanted to. That's part of your journey. That's part of who you are. And I would say if it works for you and you're willing to do that, do explain it because some people will listen.
Thank you, Philip. I think that's a great answer. It's definitely a little bit scary for sure. And I think that ties in really well to our next question, which is a common one, but again, anyone on the panel, how might you advise future law students about disclosure of disability? And so this can be at law school or at work.
If I may answer that, I know that that's been discussions that some students have been having, especially just when they're applying to jobs after their first year, and they're doing interviews or doing OCIs or articling positions and stuff, and the difficulties. Unfortunately, I know that for some, they choose not to disclose just because they don't feel comfortable. And there's sometimes feelings of barriers that, or perceptions of what people may think about them, especially if they're trying to apply. But I have heard, at least from one lawyer who's very open, that works in at a law firm, and she actually kind of explained her story and stuff too, accommodations, and being very much open in that regard. And so I think it is very much possible. I don't want to necessarily say sometimes it's not really the students, it's the hiring committees, it's the law firms and the way they frame questionings and how they look at you when you're speaking. Sometimes students don't want to look directly into your eyes. I mean, for me, sometimes I kind of like turn all the time and go across and all that too. I don't always like staring in people's eyes and stuff like that. And so I feel like there just needs to be more acceptability in that part. And I do think that's very much possible. It's just people getting out of their own way and having misconceptions about individuals and understanding the diversity of all of us. And yeah, I think once people have a better understanding of that, there's very much ways in which we can change that. So yeah, in terms of disclosure for that, I would say it needs to happen. I would also say for the bar associations too, maybe when it comes to accommodations, not to steer off, but to steer off, but it's very important for, I know a lot of, especially in Ontario, when it comes to accommodations and wanting to do the bar, it's very difficult, the bar exam, and the process is so long and delayed to the point where a lot of students who are get diagnosed in an older age, they are not able to kind of receive the accommodations, and so they just choose not to disclose if they want to, or because they don't want the headache of the stress of delays and not getting what they need. And so I think it's very, again, important for I would say it shouldn't really be only on us. Yes, we can advocate for ourselves and we can push for ways which we feel if we're comfortable to disclose, but we also need to, I'll say this very briefly, we also need allyship around us and people who are willing to say, I will help you as well. It's not about making it easy, it's just equity. And I think that needs to be understood. So yeah, that's what I would say.
Thank you, Rachel. So I know Andrew has touched on this and talked about his current legal practice working with disabled clients, but for others on the panel, have you had opportunities to practice in disability law or do disability advocacy? I'll leave this one open.
Sorry.
Go ahead, Bruce.
I touched on it a bit, but I certainly say that one of the best ways to do it is get involved in your law society or an organization like the CBA. In fact, good new some interesting news today is I just got re-upped for the diversity what I don't know what it's called. It's a diversity committee for the CBA. I mean, it was because they were short someone. So yeah, they said you have the qualifications you're looking for. I'm just like, it's because I'm Native and disabled, isn't it? Yeah, it is. But I mean, it's that perspective, and I think particularly as disabled lawyers, I think it's very key that you get into those roles. And while it's not necessarily practicing directly with disabled client with disabled law, advocacy, in a lot of areas, you're going to have a lot of intersectionality, particularly I think in criminal, where you're going to have a lot of intersectionality with people with mental illness or neurodiverse conditions that may be undiagnosed. A lot of clients with FASD or undiagnosed, untreated ADHD in the criminal justice system. It's going to be far more likely for those individuals to have a history and path of offending against legal systems, certainly in education. But like I'll circle back, and I think one of the very best ways to get involved in the advocacy is through advocacy is through professional organizations to be a voice that disabled people matter. I often say, and I'll come back to it, is that I think to an extent, very quickly, is that this disability is probably, I think, is one of the few places where it's almost the last place where it's cool or okay to be openly discriminatory. I think that there'll be people in this profession and hiring who might not be ashamed to say, I wouldn't hire a disabled lawyer, or a, I had a senior lawyer, a few years back now, but come up and like point blank asked me if my client was the R slurred, and I'm just like, yeah, not appropriate to ask them, not appropriate to ask his brother that during a bail hearing, but anyway, so I think it really is almost an area where it's almost okay where I think you'd find some people in the profession who would not be ashamed to admit discriminatory conduct against disabled people. But now it's not to say that people aren't discriminating on gender, sexual orientation, um, race, ethnicity, but I just don't I just think people will come out and say it a little bit more about disability, and so I think it's also one of those areas where it's really an emergent. I find it to be more of an emergent area that this is an appropriate area to address through equity and equity seeking individuals. I hope
Thank
that
you.
answers the question a bit.
I think that does. And for those on the call who don't know what CBA is, that's the Canadian Bar Association. And so there's lots of acronyms flying around. So feel free to ask in the chat if you'd like any of us to sort of break them down. I will turn to Rebecca next to touch on a different piece of this.
Yeah, a couple things that came to mind for me is one, take every opportunity in classes, if you want to learn and write about disability law. In every class I had a paper in, my paper was topic plus disability. And so I learned a lot and I got to write on it a lot, because it hits on everything. Also, you can look out for postings for research assistants, or other opportunities like that. I got the opportunity to do that, and it's literally been life-changing. Also, some schools will have different clinics within them, or different like intensives or streams. So you can, if you're interested in that, you can look like Osgood does have a disability law clinic intensive program. So there is lots of opportunities, some more formal and some just carve your own path, like Andrew said, and just make it happen in whatever way, like writing a paper and choosing the topic based on that. So
Thank you, Rebecca. I think there's a lot both in and out of law school, a lot of different ways to get involved. Isaac, I'll go to you next, and then we might have to wrap up for today.
That's right, Arya. Yeah, regarding the advocacy, I would say at law school, there would be many opportunities. And the reason is because, as we all talked about, there is a need for change. So when you're going to come here, you're going to recognize all these issues. You're going to see the problem we are facing in terms of the accommodation or the events that are not accessible, or the jobs that seems daunting and feels like no one's gonna accommodate you. So I think, at law school, for me, it became, that place where I recognized these issues, and I thought, this is what needs to be taken care of. And as someone else was saying, there is always that feeling of, okay, I'm facing this, I have to navigate this. I hope the next person, the person behind me would not have to go through this, right? So maybe develop a system or something like that. So, I used LSS, which Law Student Society. There's always one at law school. So, get involved. Even if you don't want to get involved, make sure you communicate with them. They're there to serve you. And for me, there were a lot of issues with, the firm events that they were conducting. They were not, accessible for me. So a lot happened when I started recognizing these issues, these patterns everywhere, and I started towards these the smaller bodies that are working to make things better. So yeah, get involved, but at the same time, don't feel pressure that you have to go and get involved, because it does get exhausting. I was vice president for the Law Student Society last year. We did a lot of good things, no regrets, but at the same time, there will be a day when you realize there are a lot more things to do than just at the law school, because it's not just the law school that needs your perspective, that perspective of a disabled human being, but even the society, they're gonna need it too. So don't burn yourself out, but make sure you take advantage of these opportunities. I did, and I don't regret it. So yeah, a lot of opportunities for advocacy for sure.
Thank you, Isaac. And so I think that brings us to time. I know this webinar really flew by. And so I'd like to thank all of our panelists for an amazing panel. And before we close out today, I'd like to highlight the Future Disabled Lawyers website. I just put the link in the chat. And so you can find some other resources there if you're interested in LSAT accommodations, things like that. That is on the website. I'd also like to close out by extending a huge thank you to all our panelists, and especially the organizing team. Thank you to our interpreters who have provided French and English translation, as well as LSQ and ASL. Thank you to the incredible folks at NEADS, Chloe, Frank, and Carly, as well as the members of the CALLED working group, Ilya, Tess, and Julia. And especially thank you to Odelia, who has worked so hard to make this event a success and who I continue to learn so much from. And so seeing this incredible group of people come together really is a testament, as Chloe said, to the strength of the disabled and neurodivergent community. And finally, thank you to our attendees. It is really important to me, and as you've heard tonight, everyone who has put time into this event, that current or future law students see disabled and neurodivergent representation in the profession. And hearing all of you speak today and seeing older lawyers and law students gives me, and I hope all of you, a lot of hope for the future of the profession. And with that, that will conclude our event. The recording will stop now.